Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're doing something really fascinating. We're stepping back, acting as totally impartial observers to unpack exactly how right-wing media is framing the political landscape right now. We're using a recent episode of Fox News' The Five as our map to see how they're constructing narratives, arguments, and rhetoric ahead of the upcoming elections.
Okay, here's our roadmap for this thematic journey. We'll be looking at 1. The Supreme Court redistricting ruling, 2. Blue cities and billionaires, 3. The debate over ICE, and 4. Crime and neighborhood watch. We are literally zooming from the highest court in the land all the way down to a local street sign. Let's jump right in.
Section 1. Supreme Court redistricting ruling the national scale. We are starting right at the very top.
So, the broadcast kicked off with a massive 6-3 Supreme Court ruling that struck down a Louisiana redistricting plan. This plan originally created a second majority black House seat, but the court said, nope, that is an unconstitutional racial gerrymander. And the rhetorical contrast on the show was just stark. You had progressives on tape calling it a devastating blow, literally a return to Jim Crow. But the conservative panel, they completely flipped the script, arguing this ruling actually enforces a colorblind constitution where people aren't sorted by race.
To really hammer this home, the panel leaned heavily on a quote from Justice Clarence Thomas. He wrote that prioritizing racial sorting is repugnant to any nation that strives for the ideal of a colorblind constitution, and that we should actively avoid the balkanization of society. The conservative argument here is basically that the Constitution is there to protect individual rights, right? Not to engineer specific outcomes for different groups.
All right, moving down a level, Section 2, Blue cities and billionaires, the city/state scale. Let's see how this plays out economically.
The show then zeroed in on heavily blue cities, and they dropped this jaw-dropping number to set the stage, $6 billion. That is the historic budget deficit New York City is staring down for the upcoming fiscal year. I mean, that is a massive financial hole, and the broadcast used it to seriously question how these cities are being run.
Now, how are progressive leaders actually handling this? The panel highlighted NYC Mayor Zohran Mamdani. He basically argued that because they inherited this colossal deficit, they desperately need new revenue and a structural reset with the state. The broadcast framed this as a clear push to squeeze even more money out of wealthy residents and corporations to keep city programs afloat.
But here's where the Five set up a wild contrast in how cities actually treat those wealthy taxpayers. They showed a clip of Seattle's mayor literally laughing, saying bye to millionaires fleeing the state's high taxes. And then they compared that dismissive attitude to a public letter from Citadel CEO Ken Griffin, laying out exactly what major businesses bring to a city's economy when they're actually welcomed.
To put a hard number on that hit, the panel noted that Ken Griffin's company alone committed $2.3 billion in taxes to New York City. Billion with a B. And that doesn't even touch the 15,000 permanent jobs or hundreds of millions in philanthropy. The panel argued that progressive mayors are completely missing the basic economics of who is actually funding their cities.
And to make matters worse, they aggressively went after how these cities spend the money they do have. Take NYC Public Schools, for example. The city spends over $40,000 per student, yet, as the panel pointed out, all that cash only yields average educational outcomes. They're using this specific data point to say, look, progressive budgeting isn't just overly expensive, it's fundamentally inefficient.
Let's zoom in a little tighter now. Section 3. The debate over ICE, the culture and policy scale.
The panel shifted to the cultural battle over immigration, specifically the Abolish ICE movement. They played this incredibly viral clip of a progressive congressional candidate from Philly on live TV. The host asks a super basic question. If you abolish ICE, who enforces the immigration laws? And the candidate just visibly freezes. They struggled and literally asked for a pause. For the panel, this was the ultimate proof that catchy progressive slogans have absolutely zero practical planning behind them.
Interestingly, even the panel's liberal voice agreed this is a huge political disconnect. She pulled up polling showing that 43% of the public supports reforming ICE, things like body cams and better training. But abolishing it entirely, that only gets about 27% support. The consensus on the broadcast was clear. Extreme messaging is a massive political liability.
So what is the tactical takeaway here? The panel laid out a very specific midterm playbook for conservatives. Go strictly on the offense. Assume the media will put you on defense, and flip it. They urged Republicans to aggressively ask their Democratic opponents, do you want to abolish ICE? And the second they answer, hit them with, okay, what are you replacing it with? It's a strategy designed to expose what they view as totally half-baked reactionary policies.
Now, before we hit our final scale, I want you to think about this question. Why on earth were 600 neighborhood watch signs suddenly removed from a city in Michigan? I know, it sounds like a weird punchline, but it perfectly brings these huge ideological debates right down to the American front yard.
Which brings us to Section 4, Crime and Neighborhood Watch, the local scale.
The broadcast had an absolute field day mocking the city of Ann Arbor, Michigan for physically removing more than 600 of those classic neighborhood watch signs from its streets.
This is where the core ideological clash hits your literal neighborhood. The city's reasoning? They claimed these signs are expressions of exclusion that might make minorities feel unwelcome. The panel, as you might guess, completely rejected that. Their argument is that neighborhood watch signs target criminals, not racial demographics, and they really hammered this home by pointing out that according to the broadcast, crime in the area had just gone up by 11%.
And adding insult to injury, the panel noted with absolute disbelief that the City Council actually voted unanimously to pull $18,000 from the general fund just to pay for the labor of taking the signs down. To the panel, spending $18 grand to remove crime prevention signs while crime is actually rising is the absolute peak of missed priorities.
So, let's connect the dots here. From the Supreme Court's redistricting rulings, to billion-dollar city budgets, to live TV debates about ICE, all the way down to a street sign in Michigan, the overarching narrative of the broadcast becomes crystal clear. It's a unified conservative critique arguing that progressive governance consistently prioritizes abstract ideology and virtue signaling over actual, practical, real-world outcomes.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this to chew on. Think about how a single broadcast weaves such a tight, cohesive narrative across every single level of American life. When voters actually step into the booth, what's going to drive their choice? Are they going to be thinking about constitutional theory, or are they going to be thinking about that missing neighborhood watch sign down the street? Thanks for joining us, and keep asking those tough questions.